Hello friends, welcome to our channel History Chronicles. On July 17, 1791, the streets of Paris became the scene of a tragic and bloody confrontation known as the Champ de Mars massacre. This event not only marked a turning point in the French Revolution, but also underscored the growing tensions and divisions within revolutionary France. Imagine the political climate in Paris during this period. The recent failure of King Louis XVI's flight to Varennes has left the nation deeply polarized. Revolutionary leaders are increasingly divided over the direction of the revolution, and the pressure on the new government is mounting. Amidst this turmoil, a growing movement of radical revolutionaries is demanding more drastic changes, including the abolition of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic. The Champ de Mars massacre occurs in the context of these mounting pressures. A large public demonstration is planned on the Champ de Mars, a vast open space in Paris, to express support for the more radical elements of the revolution. The demonstrators, many of whom are working-class Parisians, are rallying for the dissolution of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic. However, the demonstration is met with a heavy response from the authorities. The National Guard, under the command of Mayor Jean-Sylvain Bailly, is deployed to control the crowd. The situation quickly escalates as the crowd grows restless and confrontational. The demonstrators, driven by their demands for greater revolutionary changes, clash with the National Guard. Imagine the chaos of that day. The tension in the air is palpable as the National Guard, equipped with muskets and bayonets, prepares to disperse the crowd. The demonstrators, many of whom are armed with makeshift weapons and banners, stand their ground. The clash between the two sides is inevitable, and the violence that ensues is both shocking and tragic. The National Guard opens fire on the crowd, resulting in a bloodbath. The exact number of casualties is uncertain, but estimates suggest that dozens of people are killed and many more are injured. The massacre is a stark reminder of the revolution's capacity for violence and the deepening rifts within French society. The aftermath of the Champ de Mars massacre is significant. The government's violent response to the demonstration shocks the nation and further inflames revolutionary sentiments. The massacre is seen by many as a brutal attempt to suppress dissent and maintain control over the revolutionary movement. It deepens the divisions between the more radical elements of the revolution and those who seek to maintain order and stability. The massacre also has a profound impact on the perception of the revolutionaries. Many see the violence as evidence of the radicalization and extremism of the revolutionary factions. The incident undermines the credibility of the National Assembly and the more moderate revolutionary leaders, who are now viewed as complicit in the repression of the popular will. In the wake of the massacre, the revolutionary government faces increased pressure and scrutiny. The radical factions gain more prominence, and the call for more extreme measures becomes louder. The Champ de Mars massacre serves as a grim reminder of the revolution's capacity for internal conflict and the high stakes involved in the struggle for power and change. In our next episode, we will explore France's war against its neighbors, a series of conflicts that not only tested the revolutionary government, but also played a crucial role in shaping the course of the revolution. Thank you for joining us in this episode of History Chronicles. Stay tuned as we continue to uncover the dramatic events and complex dynamics of the French Revolution. See you next time. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel History Chronicles. As the French Revolution deepened, it began to cast a long shadow beyond the borders of France. By 1792, the revolutionary government found itself engaged in a series of conflicts with neighboring countries, a development that would profoundly shape the course of the revolution and the future of France. This episode delves into the complexities and consequences of France's war against its neighbors, a critical phase that both tested and transformed the revolution. Picture the summer of 1792. The revolutionary fervor in France has reached a fever pitch. The new government, born out of the radical ideals of the revolution, is grappling with internal strife and external threats. The nation's radical transformation has alarmed neighboring monarchies who fear the spread of revolutionary ideas and the potential for unrest in their own lands. The war with these neighboring countries begins with a complex mix of political and military motivations. Revolutionary France, emboldened by its recent successes and driven by a desire to spread its ideals, declares war on Austria in April 1792. The war is not merely a conflict over territorial ambitions. It is also a struggle to defend and propagate the revolutionary principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The early stages of the war are marked by a series of military setbacks for France. The French Revolutionary Army, though ideologically motivated and driven by a sense of national pride, faces a series of challenges on the battlefield. The troops are poorly trained and inadequately equipped, and the initial confrontations with the Austrian forces are both chaotic and costly. One of the most significant early battles occurs at the border town of Lille, where French forces clash with the Austrian army. The battle is fierce, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Despite the valor of the French soldiers, the lack of coordination and preparation contributes to a defeat that sends shockwaves through the revolutionary government. The war effort also puts immense pressure on the French economy and society. The conflict strains resources and exacerbates existing economic hardships. The revolutionary government's call for a total mobilization of the nation, both in terms of military enlistment and economic support, creates a sense of urgency and anxiety among the population. Amidst these challenges, the revolutionary government begins to enact more radical measures. The Committee of Public Safety is established to oversee the war effort and to ensure national security. This committee, under the leadership of figures like Maximilien Robespierre, wields significant power and authority. Its formation marks a shift towards more centralized and authoritarian control, reflecting the growing urgency and severity of the war. The war with Austria soon escalates as other European powers, including Prussia, join the conflict. The coalition of monarchies against revolutionary France grows, adding to the complexity and scale of the struggle. The war becomes not only a defense of the revolution, but also a broader struggle against a unified opposition determined to quash the revolutionary tide. In September 1792, the French Revolutionary Army achieves a significant victory at the Battle of Valmy. This battle is a turning point in the war, boosting the morale of the French forces and providing a much-needed strategic advantage. The victory at Valmy is celebrated as a triumph of revolutionary spirit and marks a shift in the war's momentum. The conflict with the neighboring countries also has profound implications for the French Revolution's internal dynamics. The war effort fuels radicalism and intensifies political divisions within France. The revolutionary government's handling of the war, along with its increasing reliance on the Committee of Public Safety, heightens tensions and sets the stage for the Reign of Terror. The war with its neighbors also prompts the revolutionary government to seek alliances and support from other revolutionary groups and sympathizers across Europe. The conflict becomes a rallying point for revolutionary movements worldwide, and France's struggle is seen as part of a larger struggle for freedom and equality. As the war drags on, it becomes clear that the revolution's success and survival depend on both military victories and internal stability. The French revolutionary government is compelled to navigate the complex interplay of domestic and foreign pressures, striving to secure its position and advance its revolutionary agenda. In our next episode, we will delve into the September massacres, a harrowing episode of violence that unfolded in Paris and further exemplified the revolution's turbulent and often brutal nature. Thank you for joining us in this episode of History Chronicles. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the dramatic events and transformative changes of the French Revolution. See you next time. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel, History Chronicles. As the French Revolution unfolded, it was marked by moments of both incredible hope and unspeakable horror. The September massacres of 1792 stand as one of the darkest chapters in this period. a brutal and chilling reminder of how fear and paranoia can turn revolutionary fervor into a bloodbath. Imagine Paris in early September 1792. The city is a cauldron of tension and anxiety. France is at war with several European powers, and the revolutionary government is under immense pressure. Rumors of royalist plots and foreign invasions are spreading like wildfire, creating a sense of imminent danger among the revolutionaries. The atmosphere is thick with fear and suspicion, and the line between friend and foe has become dangerously blurred. At the heart of this tension is the Prussian army, which is advancing towards Paris. The threat of an invasion looms large, and many Parisians fear that if the Prussians reach the city, they will restore the monarchy and exact brutal revenge on the revolutionaries. The revolutionary government, already struggling to maintain control, faces the terrifying prospect of an enemy within, those who are still loyal to the king and could betray the revolution at any moment. In this volatile environment, the prisons of Paris are filled with thousands of people accused of being enemies of the revolution. Many of them are aristocrats, clergymen, and suspected royalists, but there are also ordinary people who have been swept up in the revolutionary zeal. The fear that these prisoners might join forces with the invading Prussians and help them retake the city drives the revolutionary leaders to take drastic measures. On September 2nd, 1792, a group of sans-culottes, radical working-class revolutionaries, stormed the prisons of Paris. Fueled by fear, anger, and a desire for justice, they begin a systematic and brutal slaughter of the prisoners. The massacre is not a spontaneous outburst of violence, but rather a calculated and organized purge. Revolutionary leaders like Jean-Paul Marat and Georges Danton, though not directly involved, are accused of encouraging the violence through their inflammatory rhetoric. The bloodshed continues for several days. Prisoners are dragged from their cells and subjected to hasty and brutal trials, often little more than a formality before they are executed. Men, women, and even children are slaughtered, their bodies left to rot in the streets. The violence is so extreme that even some of the most hardened revolutionaries are horrified by the carnage. The September massacres result in the deaths of over 1,000 people, though the exact number is still debated by historians. The brutality of the killings shocks the nation and the world, casting a dark shadow over the revolution. The massacre is a turning point that signals the beginning of the Reign of Terror, a period in which fear and violence become the primary tools of the revolutionary government. The massacre also deepens the divisions within the revolutionary movement. Some see the violence as a necessary and justified act of defense against counter-revolutionaries, while others view it as a monstrous betrayal of the revolution's ideals. The events of September 1792 reveal the dangerous path that the revolution is taking, where paranoia and suspicion override justice and reason. In the aftermath of the massacre, the revolutionary government faces a difficult task: justifying the violence to both the French people and the international community. The September massacres tarnish the image of the revolution, making it harder to claim the moral high ground in the struggle against the monarchies of Europe. The killings also serve as a grim warning of what can happen when a society is gripped by fear and mistrust. As we reflect on the September massacres, it's important to remember the human cost of the revolution. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity were meant to create a better society, but the events of September 1792 show how easily those ideals can be corrupted by fear and violence. In our next episode, we will explore the rise of the Jacobins, a radical political group that would come to dominate the revolution and lead it down an even more extreme path. Thank you for joining us in this episode of History Chronicles. Stay tuned as we continue to delve into the dramatic and often tragic events of the French Revolution. See you next time. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel, History Chronicles. In the heart of the French Revolution, as the storm clouds of violence and fear began to gather, a new force emerged, one that would steer the revolution onto an even more radical and tumultuous path. This force was the Jacobins, a political group whose rise to power would change the course of the revolution and plunge France into one of its most turbulent eras. The story of the Jacobins begins in the early days of the revolution, in 1789. At that time, they were just one of many political clubs that sprang up in Paris and other parts of France. Originally known as the Society of the Friends of the Constitution, the group was formed by deputies of the Third Estate. Their initial meetings took place in the library of a former Jacobin monastery in Paris, and from this location, they derived the name by which history remembers them, the Jacobins. In the early days, the Jacobins were relatively moderate in their views. They advocated for a constitutional monarchy, similar to what had been established in England, and they believed in the principles of representative government. However, as the revolution progressed and the political landscape shifted, so too did the Jacobins' ideology. By 1792, the Jacobins had become the most influential and radical political group in France. Their rise to power was fueled by the increasing polarization of French society. As the revolution deepened, the moderate factions lost influence, while the more extreme voices gained ground. The Jacobins, with their fiery rhetoric and uncompromising stance, quickly positioned themselves as the champions of the revolution's most radical ideals. Key figures within the Jacobin Club, such as Maximilien Robespierre, Jean-Paul Marat, and Georges Danton, became the faces of this new, more radical phase of the revolution. Robespierre, in particular, was a powerful orator and a relentless advocate for the revolution's most extreme measures. His belief in the necessity of virtue, coupled with his willingness to use terror as a means to achieve it, would come to define the Jacobin rule. As the Jacobins gained power, they began to shape the direction of the revolution in increasingly radical ways. They were instrumental in the establishment of the French Republic, which was declared in September 1792, following the abolition of the monarchy. The Jacobins believed that the only way to secure the revolution was to completely dismantle the old order, and this belief led them to support some of the revolution's most extreme actions. One of the most significant steps taken by the Jacobins was the establishment of the Committee of Public Safety in April 1793. This committee was initially intended to oversee the war effort and protect the revolution from its enemies, both foreign and domestic. However, under the leadership of Robespierre and other Jacobins, the Committee of Public Safety quickly became the de facto government of France, wielding immense power and authority. The rise of the Jacobins also coincided with the intensification of the Reign of Terror, a period during which thousands of perceived enemies of the revolution were arrested, tried, and executed. The guillotine became the symbol of the revolution's justice, and the streets of Paris ran red with the blood of those who were deemed traitors. The Jacobins justified this reign of terror as a necessary means to defend the revolution and ensure its survival. The Jacobins' rule was marked by a series of radical reforms that sought to transform French society. They introduced measures to de-Christianize France, believing that the Catholic Church was an enemy of the revolution. Churches were closed or repurposed, religious symbols were destroyed, and a new secular calendar was introduced, replacing the traditional Christian holidays with revolutionary festivals. Economically, the Jacobins implemented price controls on essential goods in an attempt to combat the rampant inflation that was plaguing the country. They also redistributed land to the peasants and took steps to eliminate the remnants of feudalism, further dismantling the old order. However, the very extremism that brought the Jacobins to power also sowed the seeds of their downfall. As the reign of terror intensified, so did the fear and distrust within the revolutionary government. Robespierre, once a revered leader, began to be seen as a tyrant by his peers. The climate of fear and suspicion that the Jacobins had fostered now turned against them, and by the summer of 1794, the tide had turned. On July 27, 1794, known as the 9th of Thermidor in the revolutionary calendar, Robespierre and his closest allies were arrested. The following day, they were executed by the very guillotine that had claimed so many lives during the terror. The fall of Robespierre marked the end of the Jacobin dominance and the beginning of a new, less radical phase of the revolution. The legacy of the Jacobins is a complex one. They were both the architects of some of the revolution's most important achievements and the instigators of its most notorious excesses. Their rise and fall serve as a reminder of the dangers of extremism and the fine line between revolutionary zeal and tyranny. In our next episode, we will explore the role and significance of the Jacobin Club, where many of these pivotal decisions and debates took place. Thank you for joining us in this episode of History Chronicles. As we continue to unravel the dramatic events of the French Revolution, stay tuned for more stories that shaped the course of history. See you next time. Hello friends, welcome to our channel History Chronicles. As we journey deeper into the French Revolution, we've witnessed the rise of the Jacobins and their pivotal role in shaping the course of the revolution. But what was it about this group that made them so influential, so feared, and ultimately so powerful? Today, we're going to take a closer look at the epicenter of this radical movement, the Jacobin Club. Picture Paris in the late 1780s, a city buzzing with revolutionary fervor. In the midst of this political upheaval, a group of like-minded individuals began gathering in a former Dominican convent on the Rue Saint-Honoré. This was the birthplace of what would become the Jacobin Club, originally known as the Society of the Friends of the Constitution. The club's name was derived from its location, as the Dominicans were often referred to as Jacobins, after the convent of Saint-Jacques in Paris. At first, the Jacobin Club was just one of many political clubs springing up across France, but it quickly distinguished itself through its strict organizational structure and its commitment to the revolutionary cause. The club was open to all who shared its ideals, but it was particularly attractive to the educated middle class, lawyers, journalists, and intellectuals who sought to influence the direction of the revolution. The club's early meetings were characterized by intense debates on the issues of the day, everything from the abolition of feudal privileges to the establishment of a constitutional monarchy. As the revolution progressed, the Jacobins grew more radical in their views, and their influence began to extend far beyond the walls of the convent. One of the key factors that set the Jacobins apart was their ability to build a vast network of affiliated clubs throughout France. By 1791, there were hundreds of Jacobin societies spread across the country, each one connected to the central club in Paris. This network allowed the Jacobins to spread their ideas rapidly and mobilize support on a national scale. It also enabled them to coordinate political action and apply pressure on the National Assembly. The club's influence was further amplified by its leadership. Figures like Maximilien Robespierre, Jean-Paul Marat, and Georges Danton became the faces of the Jacobin movement. Robespierre, in particular, was a master of oratory, and his speeches at the Jacobin Club often set the tone for the revolution's next steps. His unwavering commitment to the revolution and his belief in the necessity of virtue and terror made him both revered and feared within the club. But the Jacobin Club was not just a place for fiery rhetoric and political maneuvering. It was also a hub for revolutionary culture. The club organized festivals, produced pamphlets, and even influenced fashion, promoting the red Phrygian cap as a symbol of liberty. The club's meetings were often open to the public, and they became a focal point for the revolutionary energy that was sweeping through Paris. As the revolution became more radical, so too did the Jacobin Club. By 1792, the club had become the driving force behind some of the revolution's most significant actions. It was the Jacobins who pushed for the abolition of the monarchy and the establishment of the French Republic. It was the Jacobins who supported the execution of King Louis XVI, believing that the survival of the revolution depended on the elimination of the old regime. However, the club's influence came at a cost. The more powerful the Jacobins became, the more they were seen as a threat by their rivals. The Girondins, another revolutionary faction, clashed with the Jacobins over the direction of the revolution. The rivalry between the two groups became so intense that it eventually led to the purge of the Girondins from the National Convention in 1793, a move orchestrated by the Jacobins to consolidate their power. The Jacobin Club reached the height of its power during the Reign of Terror, a period in which the club's radicalism and Robespierre's influence were at their peak. The club became synonymous with the Committee of Public Safety, which directed the terror and ordered the executions of thousands of perceived enemies of the revolution. The guillotine became the ultimate symbol of Jacobin justice, and the streets of Paris were filled with fear. But as with all things in the revolution, the Jacobins' power was fleeting. The same paranoia and suspicion that had fueled the Reign of Terror eventually turned inward. The revolutionary government, now dominated by the Jacobins, became increasingly unstable. Robespierre's refusal to moderate his views or share power led to his isolation, even within the Jacobin ranks. In July 1794, the Jacobin Club's power came crashing down with the fall of Robespierre. The 9th of Thermidor marked the beginning of the end for the Jacobins. Robespierre and his closest allies were arrested and executed, and the Jacobin Club, once the beating heart of the revolution, was effectively disbanded. The club's meeting hall was closed, and its members were either arrested or went into hiding. The legacy of the Jacobin Club is complex. On one hand, the club played a crucial role in advancing the revolution and pushing for the radical changes that transformed France. On the other hand, it also became a symbol of the excesses and violence that marred the revolution. The Jacobins' belief in the use of terror to achieve their goals has been both condemned and admired, depending on one's perspective on the revolution. As we close this chapter on the Jacobin Club, we must reflect on the paradox of the revolution. It was a movement driven by the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Yet it was also a movement that, in its most radical phase, embraced terror and tyranny. The Jacobin Club encapsulates this paradox, a force for revolutionary change that, in its quest for purity and justice, ultimately consumed itself. In our next episode, we will explore the birth of the French Republic and the seismic shift that took place as France moved from monarchy to a new form of government. Thank you for joining us on History Chronicles. The revolution is far from over, and there are still many twists and turns to come. Stay with us as we continue to unravel the complex and compelling story of the French Revolution. See you next time. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel, History Chronicles. The streets of Paris buzzed with tension in the early autumn of 1792. The air was thick with uncertainty, and the fate of a nation hung in the balance. Just months earlier, King Louis XVI had been overthrown, and France was on the brink of a monumental transformation. Today, we step into this critical moment in history, the rise of the French Republic, a pivotal chapter in the story of the French Revolution. As the monarchy crumbled, the National Assembly, which had already declared itself the legislative body of France, found itself faced with an unprecedented challenge: how to govern a nation without a king. The revolution had unleashed forces that no one could fully control, and the country was teetering on the edge of chaos. But amidst this turmoil, a new idea began to take hold, an idea that would redefine the future of France and, indeed, the world: the Republic. The concept of a republic, where power rested not in the hands of a monarch, but in the people, was not entirely new. Ancient Rome had once been a republic, and the American colonies had recently thrown off British rule to establish their own. But in France, a country long dominated by absolute monarchy, the idea was nothing short of revolutionary. The road to the republic was not straightforward. It was paved with blood, ambition, and radicalism. By September 1792, the National Assembly had transformed into the National Convention, a body elected by universal male suffrage, an unprecedented step towards true democracy. The convention's first order of business was to address the status of the monarchy. The debate was fierce, with factions within the convention arguing over whether the king should be imprisoned, exiled, or executed. The decision was clear and unyielding. France would no longer be a monarchy. On September 21st, 1792, the National Convention officially abolished the monarchy, declaring that the French Republic is one and indivisible. The next day, the revolutionaries proclaimed the year ones of the Republic, marking a new era in French history. This declaration was more than just a change in government. It was a statement of the values that would define the Republic: liberty, equality, and fraternity. These ideals, inspired by Enlightenment thinkers and the American Revolution, would become the guiding principles of the new Republic. The old order, with its rigid social hierarchies and privileges, was to be swept away, replaced by a society where every citizen was equal under the law. But the birth of the Republic was not without its complications. France was still at war with much of Europe, and internal strife threatened to tear the nation apart. The revolutionaries knew that to protect the Republic, they would need to be vigilant, even ruthless. This was a time when ideals were tested by the harsh realities of power. One of the first and most contentious acts of the new Republic was the trial of King Louis XVI. The king, now known simply as Citizen Louis Capet, was charged with treason. The trial, held before the National Convention, was both a legal proceeding and a political spectacle. The outcome was never really in doubt. On January 21st, 1793, Louis XVI was executed by guillotine, a grim symbol of the Republic's break with its monarchical past. The execution of the king shocked Europe and sent ripples throughout France. It solidified the Republic's radical turn and set the stage for the events that would follow. The Republic, born in the blood of its former king, was now committed to a path of revolutionary change, but it was also marked by a growing sense of fear and paranoia. The establishment of the Republic brought about sweeping changes in French society. The National Convention embarked on a series of reforms aimed at creating a more just and equal society. Feudal privileges were abolished, religious influence was diminished, and efforts were made to introduce a more democratic system of governance. However, these changes were met with resistance from various quarters. Royalists who still supported the monarchy, moderates who feared the excesses of the revolution, and foreign powers who viewed the French Republic as a threat to the established order. To defend the Republic, the revolutionaries believed they needed to eliminate any threat to its existence. This belief led to the formation of the Committee of Public Safety, a powerful body tasked with safeguarding the revolution from its enemies. But as the Republic grew more radical, so too did its methods of governance. The Republic's early years were dominated by the Reign of Terror, a period where revolutionary zeal often turned into violence and repression. The guillotine became a common sight in Paris, and anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activities could find themselves facing execution. The Republic, in its quest to protect itself, had become a regime of fear, where the ideals of liberty and equality were often overshadowed by the need for security. Despite these challenges, the Republic endured. It survived not just because of the ruthlessness of its leaders, but because the people of France believed in the revolution. The ideals of the Republic resonated deeply with those who had long been oppressed by the old order. The promise of a society where every citizen was equal, where privilege was based on merit rather than birth, inspired loyalty and sacrifice. In the provinces, revolutionary fervor took root. New symbols of the Republic were adopted: the tricolor flag, the Marseillaise, and the revolutionary calendar, which sought to break with the past and create a new identity for the nation. Schools were established to educate citizens in the values of the Republic, and revolutionary festivals were held to celebrate the triumph of the people over tyranny. But the Republic's greatest test was yet to come. As France waged war on multiple fronts, both abroad and at home, the survival of the Republic seemed anything but certain. The internal divisions within the revolutionary leadership, the economic hardships faced by the people, and the ever-present threat of foreign invasion all conspired to undermine the Republic's stability. And yet, it was in this crucible of conflict that the Republic forged its identity. The radical phase of the revolution may have been marked by bloodshed and terror, but it also laid the foundations for a new France. The Republic, despite its flaws, had taken root. It was a bold experiment in governance, one that would influence not only the future of France, but the course of history itself. As we close this chapter on the rise of the French Republic, we reflect on the dual nature of the revolution, its capacity to inspire and its capacity to destroy. The Republic was born out of hope for a better future, but it was also shaped by the harsh realities of power and survival. In our next episode, we will delve into one of the most dramatic and defining moments of the French Revolution, the trial and execution of Louis XVI. This event not only marked the end of the monarchy, but also set the tone for the radical phase of the revolution. Thank you for joining us on History Chronicles. The story of the French Revolution is far from over, and there are still many dramatic moments to come. Stay with us as we continue to unravel this complex and compelling narrative. See you next time. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel, History Chronicles. The chill of January 21st, 1793, cut through Paris like the blade of the guillotine. It was a day that would forever alter the course of the French Revolution and the future of France. Today, we delve into the grim yet pivotal event, the execution of Louis XVI, the once absolute monarch whose fate would symbolize the revolution's radical turn. By early 1793, France was a nation in turmoil. The revolution that began with cries for liberty and equality had taken a darker path. The monarchy had been abolished, and the French Republic was in its infancy, grappling with internal strife and external threats. The execution of King Louis XVI was not just a political act, but a deeply symbolic one, marking the definitive end of the ancient regime and the rise of a new political order. Louis XVI, who had once ruled as an absolute monarch, was now a prisoner of the revolution. His trial began in December 1792, a spectacle that captivated and horrified the nation. The charges against him were grave: conspiracy against the liberty of the French people, high treason, and crimes committed during his reign. The court proceedings were a blend of legal formality and political theater, aimed as much at securing the Republic's position as at meting out justice. The trial was conducted by the National Convention, the revolutionary body that had replaced the monarchy. The convention was deeply divided over how to handle Louis. Some members, including the Girondins, favored exile or imprisonment, believing that executing the king could exacerbate tensions and lead to further conflict. Others, particularly the Jacobins, saw execution as a necessary step to cement the Republic and deter any potential counter-revolutionary movements. On January 15, 1793, the convention voted to condemn Louis XVI. The decision was passed with a majority, and the following days saw the preparation for his execution. The king, now referred to as Citizen Louis Capet, faced his fate with a mixture of dignity and resignation. In his final hours, he expressed his concern for his family and his hope that France would find peace. The execution was carried out in the Place de la Révolution, now known as Place de la Concorde. The square, once a symbol of royal authority, had become the site of revolutionary justice. As the guillotine was readied, crowds gathered, both to witness and to celebrate the end of the monarchy. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of anticipation, fear, and revolutionary fervor. Louis XVI was transported to the guillotine in a cart, surrounded by guards and accompanied by a procession of revolutionary officials. The scene was a dramatic contrast to the grandeur of his previous royal parades. He addressed the crowd with calmness, acknowledging the revolution's power while maintaining his dignity. His final words were addressed to his family and the revolutionaries, emphasizing his acceptance of his fate. As the guillotine's blade fell, it marked not just the end of a man, but the end of an era. The death of Louis XVI was a powerful symbol of the revolution's triumph over the old order. It was a declaration that the monarchy was irrevocably overthrown and that the Republic, despite its many challenges, would move forward unshackled by its monarchical past. The execution had immediate and far-reaching consequences. It intensified the conflict between revolutionary France and the rest of Europe, with many monarchies viewing the execution as an affront and a threat. The ensuing period saw increased military engagement as France fought to defend its revolution against hostile neighboring states. Domestically, the execution deepened the divisions within the revolutionaries themselves. The radical Jacobins, led by figures like Maximilien Robespierre, gained prominence and pushed for more extreme measures to secure the Republic. The atmosphere in Paris became increasingly volatile, with political purges and revolutionary tribunals targeting perceived enemies of the state. Louis XVI execution was a momentous event, emblematic of the revolution's shift from a struggle for reform to a quest for radical change. It was a stark reminder of the lengths to which the revolutionaries were willing to go to defend their vision of the Republic and to eliminate any threat to its survival. As we reflect on this grim chapter, we recognize that the execution of Louis XVI was not merely a historical event, but a turning point that influenced the course of the French Revolution and set the stage for the radical transformations that followed. In our next episode, we will explore the significant role of women in the French Revolution, how they contributed to and were vital the execution of Louis XVI. Thank you for joining us on History Chronicles. The story of the French Revolution is far from over, and there are still many dramatic moments to come. Stay with us as we continue to unravel this complex and compelling narrative. See you next time. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel, History Chronicles. As the French Revolution raged through the streets of Paris, altering the very fabric of society, there was another revolution quietly unfolding, one driven by the women of France. Today, we turn our attention to the often overlooked but deeply influential role that women played in the French Revolution. From leading marches to shaping political discourse, the women of France were not mere bystanders. They were active participants and, in many cases, catalysts of change. The revolution was a time of immense upheaval, and with it came opportunities for voices that had long been silenced to finally be heard. Women, who had traditionally been confined to the domestic sphere, began to step into the public arena with a force that surprised many of their male counterparts. Their participation was not limited to the sidelines. They were at the forefront of key events, demanding rights and shaping the future of France. One of the most iconic moments of female activism during the Revolution was the Women's March on Versailles, which took place on October 5, 1789. Frustrated by the scarcity of bread and the economic hardships facing their families, thousands of women from Paris marched to the Palace of Versailles, the seat of royal power. Their demands were clear. They wanted food, but more importantly, they wanted the king to acknowledge their plight and take action. The march was a powerful display of solidarity and determination. Armed with whatever weapons they could find, knives, pikes, even rolling pins, the women confronted the king and his ministers with an intensity that left no room for complacency. The outcome of the march was significant. The king was forced to leave Versailles and move to the Tuileries Palace in Paris, closer to the people and under their watchful eye. This event marked a turning point, showing that the women of France could no longer be ignored. But the Women's March on Versailles was just one chapter in a much larger story. Women were active in all aspects of the revolution, from the radical clubs to the battlefield. They formed their own political organizations, such as the Society of Revolutionary Republican Women, which advocated for greater rights and participation in the new republic. These women were often at the forefront of debates about citizenship, equality, and the role of women in the new society that was emerging. The revolution also saw the rise of influential female figures who used their voices and their writings to challenge the status quo. One such figure was Olympe de Gouges, a playwright and political activist who is best known for her work, The Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen. Published in 1791, this document was a bold response to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, which had largely excluded women from the rights it proclaimed. In her declaration, Olympe de Gouges argued that women should have the same rights as men, including the right to vote, to participate in politics, and to hold public office. Olympe de Gouges' advocacy for women's rights was revolutionary in its own right. She challenged the deeply ingrained patriarchal norms of the time and called for a society where women could enjoy the same freedoms and opportunities as men. Her ideas, however, were met with resistance. The revolutionary government, dominated by male leaders, was unwilling to extend full political rights to women. Olympe de Gouges was eventually arrested and executed during the Reign of Terror, a victim of the very revolution she had sought to influence. The experiences of women during the revolution were diverse and often contradictory. While some, like Olympe de Gouges, fought for gender equality, others focused on more immediate concerns, such as the rising cost of living, food shortages, and the survival of their families. These economic hardships were a driving force behind much of the activism of ordinary women. They led protests, rioted against price increases, and demanded that the government address their needs. Women were also involved in the Revolutionary Wars, both directly and indirectly. Some disguised themselves as men to fight on the front lines, while others supported the war effort by working as nurses, seamstresses, or suppliers of goods for the troops. Their contributions were vital to the survival of the revolution, even if they were not always recognized or celebrated. The revolution opened up new possibilities for women, but it also brought new challenges. The radical changes in society led to debates about the role of women, with some revolutionaries advocating for greater equality, while others sought to reinforce traditional gender roles. The establishment of the Republic did not automatically lead to greater rights for women. In fact, the revolutionary government often took steps to limit women's political participation. The exclusion of women from voting and holding public office remained a point of contention, highlighting the limits of the revolution's promises of liberty and equality. Despite these setbacks, the legacy of women's participation in the French Revolution is undeniable. Their actions, whether on the streets of Paris, in the halls of political clubs, or in the writings of revolutionary literature, challenged the established norms and laid the groundwork for future struggles for gender equality. The revolution may not have fully realized the goals of women like Olympe de Gouges, but it set in motion a dialogue about women's rights that would continue for generations. As we conclude this episode, it is important to recognize that the story of the French Revolution is not just the story of men and their political battles. It is also the story of women. Women who marched, who spoke out, who demanded change, and who, despite the odds, made their mark on history. In our next episode, we will explore the rise of the Girondins and their role in shaping the revolution. Thank you for joining us on History Chronicles. The story of the French Revolution is far from over, and there are still many dramatic moments to come. Stay with us as we continue to unravel this complex and compelling narrative. See you next time. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel, History Chronicles. As the French Revolution unfolded, the political landscape of France became increasingly complex and fragmented. Among the many factions vying for control, one group stood out for their initial influence and eventual tragic downfall: the Girondins. Today, we delve into the rise and fall of the Girondins, a group that played a pivotal role in the early years of the revolution, but was ultimately consumed by the very forces they helped unleash. The Girondins, also known as the Girondists, were a political faction that emerged in the National Assembly during the early years of the revolution. They were named after the Gironde department in southwestern France, where many of their leaders hailed from. The Girondins were known for their moderate and somewhat idealistic approach to the revolution. They believed in the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, but they also favored a constitutional monarchy and were wary of the more radical elements within the revolutionary movement. Initially, the Girondins were among the most influential voices in the National Assembly. They were advocates of expanding the revolution beyond France's borders, believing that the principles of the revolution should be spread across Europe. This belief led them to push for war with Austria and Prussia, a conflict that would ultimately have far-reaching consequences for the revolution and for France itself. In April 1792, the Girondins succeeded in convincing the National Assembly to declare war on Austria. This decision was driven by a combination of ideological fervor and political calculation. The Girondins hoped that a successful war would not only spread revolutionary ideals, but also strengthen their position within the Assembly. They believed that the war would unite the French people behind the revolution and weaken the influence of the monarchy and the counter-revolutionary forces. However, the war did not go as the Girondins had planned. The French army, poorly trained and equipped, suffered a series of humiliating defeats in the early stages of the conflict. These setbacks fueled fears of an imminent invasion by foreign powers and heightened the sense of crisis within France. The Girondins, who had been the leading advocates of the war, found themselves increasingly under attack from their political rivals, particularly the more radical Jacobins. As the war dragged on, the Girondins' position within the National Assembly began to weaken. They were accused of being too moderate, of compromising with the monarchy, and of failing to address the pressing needs of the French people. The Jacobins, led by figures like Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton, capitalized on the growing discontent and positioned themselves as the true defenders of the revolution. The tension between the Girondins and the Jacobins came to a head in the summer of 1792. The radicalization of the revolution was accelerating, driven by economic hardship, fear of foreign invasion, and the increasing influence of the Parisian sans-culottes, working-class revolutionaries who demanded more radical measures. The Girondins, who still favored a constitutional monarchy, found themselves increasingly out of step with the revolutionary fervor of the time. The turning point came on August 10, 1792, when a mob of sans-culottes stormed the Tuileries Palace, where King Louis XVI and his family were residing. The king was arrested, and the monarchy was effectively overthrown. The Girondins, who had tried to walk a fine line between the monarchy and the more radical elements of the revolution, were now caught in a political maelstrom. Their reluctance to fully embrace the abolition of the monarchy and their opposition to some of the more extreme measures proposed by the Jacobins led to their gradual isolation within the Assembly. The situation worsened for the Girondins after the execution of Louis XVI in January 1793. Although some Girondins had supported the king's trial, they were divided on the question of his execution. Their ambivalence on this issue further eroded their support among the more radical revolutionaries, who viewed them as indecisive and insufficiently committed to the revolution's goals. The final blow to the Girondins came in the spring of 1793, as the war with Austria and Prussia continued to go badly, and as economic conditions in France deteriorated, the Jacobins and their allies began to consolidate power. On June 2, 1793, a group of Jacobin leaders, backed by the sans-culottes, orchestrated a purge of the National Convention, resulting in the arrest of 29 leading Girondins. This event, known as the Insurrection of 31st of May, 2nd of June 1793, marked the end of the Girondins as a political force. The arrested Girondins were eventually tried and executed, accused of being counter-revolutionaries and enemies of the people. Their fall was swift and brutal, a stark reminder of how quickly the tides of revolution could turn. The Girondins, who had once been among the most powerful factions in the National Assembly, were now seen as traitors to the cause they had once championed. Yet, the legacy of the Girondins is not one of failure alone. Their commitment to certain revolutionary principles, such as liberty and the rule of law, continued to resonate even after their downfall. The Girondins' vision of a moderate and constitutional government ultimately failed to take root during the Revolution. But it foreshadowed the later developments in French political life, including the eventual establishment of a more stable and democratic order. In the end, the story of the Girondins is a cautionary tale about the dangers of political idealism in times of radical change. Their rise and fall reflect the broader dynamics of the French Revolution, where alliances were fleeting, and the line between hero and traitor was often razor thin. As we conclude this episode, it is important to recognize that the French Revolution was not just a battle between opposing ideologies, but also a struggle for survival in a world where power was constantly shifting. The Girondins, with their hopes and flaws, were a crucial part of this struggle. In our next episode, we will explore one of the most terrifying and bloody phases of the Revolution, the Reign of Terror. Join us as we delve into the events that led to this period of extreme violence and political purges. The story of the French Revolution is far from over, and there are still many dramatic moments to come. Stay with us as we continue to unravel this complex and compelling narrative. See you next time. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel, History Chronicles. As the French Revolution progressed, the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity were increasingly overshadowed by violence, paranoia, and the relentless pursuit of revolutionary purity. This period, known as the Reign of Terror, is one of the darkest chapters in the history of the Revolution, a time when fear ruled the streets of Paris and the guillotine became the symbol of revolutionary justice. The Reign of Terror officially began in September 1793, though its roots can be traced back to the deepening crises that France faced in the preceding months. The young French Republic was beset by enemies on all sides. Internally, the country was racked by civil war, economic hardship, and widespread discontent. Externally, France was at war with a coalition of European monarchies, each determined to crush the revolution and restore the old order. The leaders of the revolution, particularly the radical Jacobins who had risen to power, believed that the survival of the Republic depended on their ability to root out counter-revolutionary elements both within France and among the population. They argued that extraordinary measures were necessary to protect the revolution from its enemies, and so they embarked on a campaign of terror to silence dissent and consolidate their control. At the heart of this campaign was the Committee of Public Safety, a powerful body that had been established by the National Convention to oversee the defense of the Republic. The committee, initially intended as a temporary measure, quickly became the de facto government of France, with sweeping powers to arrest, try, and execute anyone deemed a threat to the revolution. Maximilien Robespierre, one of the leading figures of the Jacobins, emerged as the most influential member of the Committee of Public Safety. Robespierre was a man of uncompromising principles and a fervent believer in the revolutionary cause. He argued that terror was not only necessary, but virtuous, a means to achieve the greater good of a just and equal society. Under his guidance, the Committee of Public Safety set about implementing a regime of terror that would leave an indelible mark on French history. One of the first acts of the Reign of Terror was the Law of Suspects, passed in September 1793. This law authorized the arrest of anyone suspected of being an enemy of the revolution, a term that was deliberately broad and vague. In practice, it meant that almost anyone could be accused of counter-revolutionary activity, from former nobles and clergy to ordinary citizens who voiced even mild criticism of the government. The revolutionary tribunals, established to try those accused under the Law of Suspects, operated with ruthless efficiency. Trials were often little more than formalities, with the outcome, a sentence of death, decided in advance. The guillotine, a device initially invented as a humane method of execution, became the instrument of mass murder. In Paris, the Place de la Révolution, where the guillotine was erected, became a site of daily executions, with crowds gathering to watch as the condemned met their fate. The terror was not confined to Paris alone. Across France, revolutionary tribunals and local committees carried out purges of suspected counter-revolutionaries. In the Vendée region, where a royalist uprising had broken out, the response was particularly brutal. Tens of thousands of people were killed in what has been described as one of the first instances of modern genocide. The countryside was left devastated, and the survivors were left to rebuild their lives amid the ruins. The Reign of Terror reached its zenith in the early months of 1794. By this time, the Committee of Public Safety had virtually unchecked power, and Robespierre's influence was at its peak. Under his leadership, the revolution took on an increasingly ideological character. Robespierre believed that the revolution had to be purified of all its enemies, and he saw himself as the moral guardian of the Republic. One of the most infamous events of the Reign of Terror was the execution of the Dantonists in April 1794. Georges Danton, once a close ally of Robespierre, had grown increasingly disillusioned with the excesses of the Terror. He and his followers, known as the Dantonists, began to call for an end to the executions and a return to more moderate policies. Robespierre, however, viewed this as a betrayal of the revolution, and he ordered the arrest and execution of Danton and his supporters. Their deaths marked the beginning of the end for the Reign of Terror. As the terror intensified, so too did the atmosphere of fear and suspicion. No one was safe from the purges, not even the revolution's most ardent supporters. The Jacobins, once a united front, began to fracture as rivalries and personal vendettas came to the fore. The slightest hint of disloyalty could result in arrest and execution, and even Robespierre's closest associates began to fear for their lives. The end of the Reign of Terror came as suddenly as its beginning. In July 1794, Robespierre, who had dominated French politics for so long, found himself increasingly isolated. His obsession with purging the revolution of its enemies had alienated many of his former allies, and his control over the Committee of Public Safety began to weaken. On July 27, 1794, Robespierre was arrested by the National Convention, and the following day he was executed by guillotine. With his death, the Reign of Terror came to an abrupt end. The legacy of the Reign of Terror is one of deep ambivalence. On the one hand, it was a period of horrific violence and repression, where thousands of people lost their lives in the name of revolutionary justice. On the other hand, it was also a time when the revolutionaries believed they were defending the very existence of the Republic against overwhelming odds. The terror was, in their eyes, a necessary evil, a means of preserving the revolution and ensuring that its principles would survive. In the years that followed, the memory of the Reign of Terror would haunt France. The guillotine became a symbol not only of the revolution's excesses, but also of its uncompromising pursuit of justice. The events of the terror would be debated and reinterpreted by historians and political thinkers for centuries to come, each generation grappling with the moral complexities of this dark chapter in French history. As we conclude this episode, it is clear that the Reign of Terror was a period of both great fear and great resolve, a time when the revolution was tested in the most extreme of circumstances. The terror may have ended, but the revolution continued, and its ideals would go on to shape the future of France and the world. In our next episode, we will explore the fall of Robespierre and the events that led to the end of the Reign of Terror. Thank you for joining us on History Chronicles. The story of the French Revolution is far from over, and there are still many dramatic moments to come. Stay with us as we continue to unravel this complex and compelling narrative. See you next time. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel, History Chronicles. In the wake of the Reign of Terror, one name stands out as both a symbol of revolutionary zeal and a harbinger of its excesses: Maximilien Robespierre. The fall of Robespierre marked the dramatic end of a period defined by fear and bloodshed, and his downfall reshaped the course of the French Revolution. Today, we explore the rise and fall of this complex figure, whose fate would come to epitomize the tumultuous nature of revolutionary politics. By the summer of 1794, the atmosphere in France was charged with tension and uncertainty. The revolutionary government, under Robespierre's leadership, had pushed the nation to its limits. Robespierre, once a champion of the revolutionary cause, had become increasingly isolated. His radical policies and relentless pursuit of revolutionary purity had alienated many of his former allies, creating a climate ripe for political upheaval. Robespierre's influence had peaked during the Reign of Terror. As a member of the Committee of Public Safety, he wielded unprecedented power, overseeing the revolutionary tribunals and the widespread use of the guillotine. His speeches and proclamations were infused with an uncompromising commitment to the revolution's ideals, but this very rigidity began to sow the seeds of his downfall. The turning point came in the spring of 1794. Robespierre's grip on power had started to weaken as his methods increasingly came under scrutiny. The Law of 22 Prairial, passed in June 1794, epitomized his approach. It streamlined the judicial process, making it easier to convict and execute those accused of counter-revolutionary activities. While intended to safeguard the revolution, it also intensified the climate of fear and suspicion, further isolating Robespierre from the broader political spectrum. Robespierre's downfall was accelerated by his growing paranoia. He saw enemies everywhere, from political rivals to former allies. His insistence on purging the revolution of perceived threats created a sense of dread among even his closest supporters. The atmosphere of fear that Robespierre had used to control the nation now turned against him, as those who once admired his vision began to view him as a tyrant. The immediate cause of Robespierre's fall was a dramatic shift in the National Convention. On July 26, 1794, Robespierre delivered a speech that would seal his fate. In this speech, he condemned what he saw as enemies of the revolution and implied that a new purge was imminent. Robespierre spoke with fiery rhetoric, declaring that the Republic is in danger and denouncing the conspirators who were supposedly threatening the revolutionary government. He asserted that the people needed to be purified and that enemies were hidden within the convention itself. The speech was notable for its intensity and its direct threats. Robespierre pointedly mentioned that he held in his possession a list of these conspirators, but he refused to reveal their names. This tactic, meant to pressure the convention into compliance, had the opposite effect. Members of the convention saw this as a clear threat to their own lives and positions. They feared that Robespierre would use his list as a pretext to initiate another wave of purges, targeting anyone who opposed him. Robespierre's speech was a miscalculation that led directly to his downfall. The members of the National Convention, alarmed and dismayed by his aggressive tone and veiled threats, quickly decided to act against him. On the very day of his speech, July 26th, he and his close associates were arrested. The arrest was a dramatic reversal of fortune. The man who had once wielded absolute power was now at the mercy of his enemies. The following day, Robespierre and his allies were brought to trial. The trial was brief, and the outcome was predictable. Robespierre, along with his closest supporters, was condemned to death. The execution was swift and brutal. Robespierre was guillotined on July 28, 1794, along with several of his associates. His fall marked the end of the Reign of Terror and a significant shift in the revolutionary period. Robespierre's execution was not merely a personal downfall, but a symbolic end to a particular phase of the French Revolution. The Reign of Terror, characterized by its extreme measures and the pervasive atmosphere of fear, was now over. The fall of Robespierre allowed for a reassessment of revolutionary policies and led to the establishment of a more moderate government. In the aftermath of Robespierre's death, the revolution entered a new phase. The National Convention, now free from the terror's grip, began to dismantle the institutions of the Reign of Terror. The revolutionary tribunals were reformed, and the use of the guillotine became less frequent. The period known as the Thermidorian reaction saw a return to more moderate policies and a focus on stabilizing the nation after the tumultuous years of radicalism. The fall of Robespierre also marked a turning point in revolutionary ideology. The radical ideals that had driven the Reign of Terror were tempered by the need for political stability and economic recovery. The revolution's leaders now faced the challenge of reconciling their revolutionary aspirations with the realities of governing a nation recovering from years of upheaval. Robespierre's legacy is a complex and contested one. To some, he remains a martyr for revolutionary ideals, a figure who sought to create a just society, but was undone by the very forces he sought to control. To others, he represents the dangers of unchecked power and the perils of radicalism taken to its extreme. As we conclude this episode, it is evident that the fall of Robespierre was a pivotal moment in the French Revolution, a moment that marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The revolution continued, But the lessons of the Reign of Terror and Robespierre's downfall would shape the course of French history for years to come. In our next episode, we will examine the Directory rule, the government that succeeded the Reign of Terror and faced its own set of challenges. Thank you for joining us on History Chronicles. The story of the French Revolution is far from over, and there are still many dramatic moments to come. Stay with us as we continue to unravel this complex and compelling narrative. See you next time. Hello friends, welcome to our channel History Chronicles. As we move beyond the dramatic fall of Robespierre, we enter a new and critical phase of the French Revolution, the era of the Directory rule. This period, spanning from 1795 to 1799, marked a shift from the radical extremes of the Reign of Terror to a more moderate and complex form of government. Today, we explore the challenges, achievements, and eventual shortcomings of the Directory, a government that sought to stabilize France but faced numerous obstacles. With the end of the Reign of Terror and the execution of Robespierre, the National Convention sought to restore order and prevent further radicalism. The result was the establishment of the Directory, a 5-member executive body designed to balance power and provide a stable government. The new constitution, known as the Constitution of the Year 30, was adopted in 1795, creating a bicameral legislature and a directory with significant executive authority. The Directory was intended to bring stability after years of revolutionary upheaval. It was composed of 5 directors elected by the legislature who were meant to oversee the administration of the government. The aim was to avoid the concentration of power seen under Robespierre and to create a more balanced system. However, the Directory faced immediate challenges that would test its ability to govern effectively. One of the primary challenges was the economic instability inherited from the Revolutionary Wars and radical policies. France was burdened with debt, and inflation was rampant. The revolutionary government had left the country in a precarious economic situation, with food shortages and economic distress affecting the daily lives of ordinary citizens. The Directory struggled to address these issues, and its attempts at economic reform were often inadequate or poorly executed. Politically, the Directory faced opposition from both the left and the right. On the left, the Jacobins, who had been sidelined after Robespierre's fall, continued to oppose the new government, seeing it as insufficiently revolutionary. They criticized the Directory for failing to address social and economic inequalities. On the right, Royalists and conservatives sought to restore the monarchy, viewing the Directory as a temporary and unsatisfactory solution. This polarized political environment made governance difficult and often contentious. Another significant issue was the ongoing conflict with external enemies. France was still engaged in wars with various European powers, including Britain, Austria, and Prussia. The Revolutionary Wars, which had begun during the earlier phases of the Revolution, continued to drain French resources and complicate the political landscape. The Directory had to manage these wars while trying to maintain internal stability, a balancing act that proved challenging. The Directory also struggled with internal corruption and inefficiency. The 5 directors were often accused of mismanagement and self-dealing. This corruption undermined public confidence in the government and fueled disillusionment. Moreover, the electoral system that had created the Directory was criticized for being overly complex and unrepresentative, contributing to a lack of legitimacy and effectiveness. Despite these difficulties, the Directory did achieve some notable successes. It introduced reforms in education, creating new schools and universities, and attempted to stabilize the currency. It also pursued a policy of military expansion, which led to several notable victories. Napoleon Bonaparte, who emerged as a prominent military leader during this period, played a key role in these successes. His campaigns in Italy and Egypt helped bolster the reputation of the Directory and provided a temporary boost to national morale. However, the successes of the Directory were overshadowed by its inability to address fundamental issues. The continued economic struggles, political instability, and the persistent threat of internal and external opposition weakened the government's hold on power. By the late 1790s, it became clear that the Directory was facing a crisis. The final blow to the Directory came in 1799 with the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. In November of that year, Napoleon staged a coup d'etat, known as the Coup of 18 Brumaire, which effectively ended the Directory. He established the Consulate, a new government with himself as the first consul, marking the end of the revolutionary period and the beginning of a new era in French history. The Directory rule was a transitional period characterized by its efforts to balance revolutionary ideals with the practicalities of governance. While it aimed to provide stability and avoid the excesses of the Reign of Terror, it struggled with internal and external challenges that ultimately led to its downfall. The era of the Directory set the stage for the rise of Napoleon and the subsequent transformation of France. As we conclude this episode, we see that the Directory rule was both a time of significant achievements and profound difficulties. It represents a complex chapter in the French Revolution, one that illustrates the challenges of creating a stable government in the midst of radical change. In our next episode, we will explore the White Terror, a period of reactionary violence against former revolutionaries and political adversaries. Thank you for joining us on History Chronicles. The story of the French Revolution is far from over, and there are still many dramatic moments to come. Stay with us as we continue to unravel this complex and compelling narrative. See you next time. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel, History Chronicles. As the echoes of the Reign of Terror began to fade and the Directory took control, France found itself grappling with the aftermath of years of revolutionary fervor. But the story of the revolution was far from over. Today, we delve into the era known as the White Terror, a period marked by reactionary violence and the settling of old scores. The White Terror emerged as a direct response to the Reign of Terror that had plagued France under the leadership of Robespierre and the Jacobins. While the Reign of Terror had seen thousands executed in the name of revolutionary purity, the White Terror was driven by those who sought to avenge these acts and restore a sense of order, or at least their version of it. This period, spanning from 1795 to 1796, saw a wave of violence targeted against the former revolutionaries, particularly the Jacobins and their supporters. After the fall of Robespierre and the end of the Reign of Terror, many in France were eager to distance themselves from the radical excesses of the revolution. The Thermidorians, who had orchestrated Robespierre's downfall, quickly moved to dismantle the mechanisms of the terror, abolishing the Revolutionary Tribunal and releasing political prisoners. However, the anger and fear that had been stoked during the previous years did not simply disappear. Instead, they shifted direction, fueling the White Terror. The White Terror was not a centrally coordinated movement, but rather a series of local and regional reprisals carried out by various groups. In the southern regions of France, particularly in the cities of Lyon, Marseille, and Toulon, Royalists and moderates who had suffered under the Jacobin regime took up arms against their former persecutors. Bands of vigilantes, known as Companies of the Sun or Companies of Jesus, roamed the countryside, targeting former revolutionaries, officials, and anyone suspected of Jacobin sympathies. In Lyon, a city that had been harshly punished by the Jacobins for its resistance during the Revolution, the White Terror took on particularly brutal forms. Former members of the revolutionary committees were hunted down and killed, often without trial. Houses were looted, and those associated with the Jacobins were subjected to public humiliation, imprisonment, or execution. In Toulon, the naval port that had been a stronghold of revolutionary sentiment, similar scenes of violence unfolded as royalists sought to reclaim control. The violence of the White Terror was fueled not only by political motivations, but also by personal vendettas and social tensions. In many cases, those who had suffered under the revolutionary regime saw this as an opportunity to exact revenge on their tormentors. Landowners who had lost property during the revolution sought to reclaim their lands, while others simply wanted to settle old scores. The lines between political justice and personal retribution often blurred, leading to widespread chaos and bloodshed. Despite the intensity of the White Terror, the Directory government was slow to respond. The Directory, itself struggling to maintain stability in a country still reeling from years of revolution, was wary of reigniting widespread violence. While the government officially condemned the excesses of the White Terror, it was reluctant to take decisive action against those involved, fearing that it could lead to further unrest. As a result, many of those who perpetrated acts of violence during this period went unpunished, and the legacy of the White Terror remained a dark stain on the post-revolutionary landscape. The White Terror, though less centralized and systematic than the Reign of Terror, left a significant impact on the French psyche. It highlighted the deep divisions within French society that had been exacerbated by the revolution and underscored the challenges of reconciling a nation torn apart by years of ideological conflict. For many, the White Terror was a grim reminder that the revolution's ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity were far from being realized, and that the struggle for a just and stable society was ongoing. As the violence of the White Terror subsided, France continued to grapple with the legacies of the revolution. The Directory, while managing to bring some degree of order to the country, was increasingly viewed as corrupt and ineffective. The political landscape remained volatile, with various factions vying for power and influence. Against this backdrop of uncertainty, one figure was rapidly rising to prominence: Napoleon Bonaparte. In our next episode, we will explore how revolutionary ideas spread among the common people and the lasting impact these ideas had on French society and beyond. Thank you for joining us on History Chronicles. The story of the French Revolution is far from over, and there are still many dramatic moments to come. Stay with us as we continue to unravel this complex and compelling narrative. See you next time. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel History Chronicles. As we travel through the streets of Paris in the year 1792, the echoes of revolution are not only reshaping France, but are beginning to ripple across the entire European continent. The French Revolution, which started as a bold experiment to create a society based on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, is now becoming a force that will challenge the very foundations of monarchies and aristocracies beyond France's borders. The revolution in France was not just a local event. It was a dramatic upheaval that threatened the established order of all of Europe. Monarchs, nobles, and commoners alike watched with a mixture of fear, hope, and curiosity as the people of France rose up to overthrow centuries of entrenched power. The impact of this revolution would be felt far and wide, leading to wars, the spread of revolutionary ideas, and ultimately, a complete reshaping of Europe. By 1792, the revolution had already made significant changes within France. The monarchy had been severely weakened, a constitution had been established, and the French Republic was on the horizon. But these changes did not go unnoticed by France's neighbors. The monarchies of Europe were alarmed by the developments in France. They feared that the revolutionary ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity could inspire their own populations to revolt. The prospect of the French people successfully establishing a government without a king was seen as a direct threat to their own power. The initial reaction from the European powers was one of caution and concern. Austria and Prussia, in particular, were deeply worried about the spread of revolutionary fervor. They saw the events in France as a dangerous precedent that could destabilize the entire continent. In response, they formed a coalition with the aim of restoring the French monarchy and stopping the revolution from spreading. This coalition would soon lead to the outbreak of the French Revolutionary Wars, a series of conflicts that would engulf Europe for over a decade. As tensions escalated, the French revolutionary government found itself increasingly isolated. Facing external threats from Austria, Prussia, Britain, and other European powers, France declared war on Austria in April 1792. This marked the beginning of a long and brutal conflict that would see the revolutionary armies of France pitted against the combined might of Europe's monarchies. The war was not just a struggle for territorial control, but a battle of ideologies between the old order of absolute monarchies and the new revolutionary principles that sought to redefine governance. The French Revolutionary Wars had a profound impact on Europe. As French armies marched across the continent, they carried with them the ideals of the revolution. In many of the territories they occupied, they abolished feudal privileges, introduced new legal codes, and promoted the idea of popular sovereignty. In some places, these changes were welcomed by the local populations who saw the French as liberators. In others, they were met with resistance, as the imposition of French rule often came with heavy taxation and conscription into the French army. One of the most significant impacts of the French Revolution on Europe was the spread of revolutionary ideas. The concepts of individual rights, equality before the law, and the idea that sovereignty rested with the people, rather than a monarch, began to take root in other parts of Europe. These ideas would inspire a wave of uprisings and revolutions across the continent in the years to come. For example, in the 1790s, revolutionary movements emerged in places like Belgium, the Netherlands, and even parts of Italy, all of which were influenced by the French example. However, the spread of revolutionary ideas also led to a backlash. The conservative forces in Europe, particularly the monarchies and the Catholic Church, saw the revolution as a dangerous contagion that needed to be contained. This led to the formation of various coalitions against France, with the goal of crushing the revolution and restoring the old order. The most powerful of these was the First Coalition, which included Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. These powers were determined to stop the spread of revolutionary ideas and prevent them from taking root in their own countries. Despite the efforts of the European monarchies, the French revolutionary armies were remarkably successful. Under the leadership of talented generals like Napoleon Bonaparte, the French military achieved a series of stunning victories, expanding French influence across Europe. By the late 1790s, France had established a number of client republics in Italy, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, where revolutionary governments were installed with the support of French troops. The success of the French revolutionary armies and the spread of revolutionary ideas had a transformative effect on Europe. The old feudal structures that had dominated Europe for centuries began to crumble. The idea of nationalism, where people identified with their nation rather than a monarch, began to take hold. This shift in thinking would lead to the unification of countries like Germany and Italy later in the 19th century. However, the impact of the French Revolution on Europe was not without its costs. The wars of the revolutionary period were devastating, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians. The imposition of French rule in occupied territories often led to resentment and rebellion. In many places, the revolutionary governments were seen as oppressive, leading to uprisings against French control. As we reflect on the broader impact of the French Revolution on Europe, it is clear that this period marked the beginning of a new era. The revolution challenged the traditional power structures of Europe, introduced new political ideas, and set the stage for the rise of modern nation-states. The legacy of the revolution would continue to shape European history for decades to come, influencing everything from the Napoleonic Wars to the revolutions of 1848. The French Revolution was not just a moment in history. It was a catalyst for change that transformed Europe and the world. It forced monarchies to adapt or perish, inspired movements for democracy and human rights, and reshaped the map of Europe. The reverberations of this revolution would be felt far beyond the borders of France, leaving an indelible mark on the course of history. As we conclude this episode, let's prepare ourselves to delve deeper into the transformative events that followed, particularly the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, a figure whose ambitions and military genius would take the ideals of the French Revolution to the farthest reaches of Europe and beyond. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring with History Chronicles. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel, History Chronicles. As the dust settled from the tumultuous years of revolution, France was forever changed. The monarchy had been dismantled, the ancient regime was no more, and new ideas had taken root in the minds of the French people. But with the end of the revolution, a new era was on the horizon, one that would be shaped by the towering figure of Napoleon Bonaparte. By the time the Directory was established in 1795, the French Revolution had entered its final phase. The Directory was a 5-member committee that served as the executive branch of the French government, and its rule was marked by political instability, economic difficulties, and widespread corruption. Although the Directory managed to stabilize France to some extent after the Reign of Terror, it struggled to gain the support of the people and was constantly threatened by internal and external challenges. One of the most pressing issues during the Directory's rule was the continuing wars with other European powers. France was still at war with Austria, Britain, and other coalitions that sought to restore the monarchy and crush the revolutionary ideals that had taken hold in France. These wars, often called the Revolutionary Wars, drained France's resources and placed immense pressure on the government. The Directory, desperate to maintain control, turned increasingly to the military to defend the Republic and suppress internal dissent. Among the military leaders who rose to prominence during this time was a young general named Napoleon Bonaparte. Born on the island of Corsica, Napoleon quickly distinguished himself as a brilliant and ambitious commander. His successes in the Italian campaign and his daring exploits in Egypt captured the imagination of the French people and made him a national hero. As the Directory faltered, Napoleon's star continued to rise, and he became seen as the savior of the revolution and the Republic. But the revolution was not only about wars and political machinations. It was also about the spread of revolutionary ideas among the common people. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity had permeated French society, inspiring people from all walks of life to fight for their rights and challenge the status quo. These ideas were spread through pamphlets, newspapers, and speeches, and they resonated deeply with a population that had long been oppressed by the old regime. In the cities and countryside alike, people debated the meaning of the revolution and its implications for the future. The revolution had shown that change was possible, that the people could rise up and overthrow tyranny. Even as the revolutionaries faced setbacks and defeats, the flame of revolutionary fervor burned brightly, inspiring new movements and struggles for justice, not just in France, but across the world. However, by the late 1790s, the revolution's energy was beginning to wane. The constant wars, political purges, and economic hardships had taken their toll on the French people. Many were disillusioned with the revolution's failures and longed for stability and peace. It was in this atmosphere of exhaustion and uncertainty that Napoleon saw his opportunity. In 1799, Napoleon staged a coup d'état known as the 18th Brumaire, overthrowing the Directory and establishing the consulate with himself as the first consul. This marked the end of the French Revolution and the beginning of a new chapter in French history, the Napoleonic era. Under Napoleon's leadership, France would undergo significant reforms, expand its territory through conquest, and become a dominant power in Europe. But the Napoleonic era is a story for another time, as it carries its own complexities, triumphs, and tragedies. The French Revolution had achieved much, abolishing the monarchy, establishing a republic, and spreading the ideas of liberty and equality. But it also revealed the deep divisions within society and the challenges of building a new order. The revolution was a time of great hope and great suffering, a period of both inspiration and terror. And as it drew to a close, it left behind a legacy that would continue to influence the world for generations to come. Thank you for joining us on History Chronicles as we've explored the incredible journey of the French Revolution. We've seen how the revolution transformed France and how it set the stage for the rise of one of history's most famous figures, Napoleon Bonaparte. The story doesn't end here. There's much more to uncover about Napoleon's rise to power and the impact he had on France and the world. But that's a story for another time. Stay tuned, as we'll be back with more episodes on the fascinating and complex history that shaped our world. See you next time.